next panel as well on women in business and the importance of financial literacy. So I want to welcome our panelists, Tamina, Adora, Fern, and Jenny. Thank you all so much for being here. If you could all please introduce yourselves to the audience.
Hey, yeah, I can go ahead. Can you just confirm that that the audio is working and that we can all hear each other?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Fern. I graduated from Bucknell with a chemical engineering degree. And then after graduation, went into investment banking. Right now, I work at Apple doing procurement in the battery technology space. I met Scott, I think 4 years ago at this point, and have been doing quite a bit of work with FinMango over the past 4 years, focused mainly in Uganda with the Fincubator program, and super excited to be here. I love FinMango, and yeah, excited to get started. Thanks.
I'm Adora. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to participate on the panel today because I have a deep passion for financial inclusion and the capacity of founders and young people to grow their business and to be able to create an impact. And I think in my past work, I've been particularly inspired by the capacity of young people to transform society through innovation, through their ideas. So I think it's really important that we give them the tools to be able to do that. I was really excited to meet Scott virtually last year when he reached out to me to talk about FinMango. And I really think it's an amazing initiative that you guys are putting on today to support young people.
Thank you, Adora. Jenny, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you, Ahana. Thank you for having me here. My name is Jenny Kim. I am Deputy General Counsel at Koch Industries. I'm super excited to be here because I think all types of literacy is truly, truly important, not just financial, but financial is one way to get started. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting nuggets about how everyone can shine, especially compared to a diamond, which shines very brightly. But I think it's also important to be sure to not lose your soul and to make sure that you understand that how you define success is not necessarily the way that other people will define success, and that everything's a tool to get you along the way, and there's no final destination other than death. And even that, in some religions, is not a final destination. So I think it's to keep all that in mind, and that's why literacy, financial, religious, cultural, are so important. And thank you for having me. And I met Scott last year at Net Impact. So, and since then we've been communicating.
Thank you, Jenny. Tamina, why don't you?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Tamina Day. I'm a corporate governance expert, and I'm also very passionate about supporting women in business. Happy to be here with you today, and you can read my full bio on FinMango's website.
Thank you all so much. I'm really excited to get this panel started. And I guess my first question is something that kind of plays on my mind a little as a woman who will eventually in business and corporate world. And Fern, I know you have some experience in mentoring. So my question is, what do you think is the biggest apprehension that women have while entering a business environment? And how do you think financial literacy can help?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll kind of address the two questions separately. First, you know, what are some of the apprehensions that women that I've mentored had when they were entering the corporate space? And like, I can also speak to some of the personal apprehensions that I had as a graduating senior. With an engineering degree going into investment banking, which is just like a very different background than the traditional investment banker would have. And for me, it was really, I wasn't nervous about like my technical competency or my competency like in the workplace about doing really great work. And I think that many women don't share that apprehension. Like we know that we're incredibly bright and can compete with our male counterparts in terms of work ethic and just pure like raw aptitude. I think that something that like I was very nervous about and that a lot of women are very nervous about are more about the networking that happens outside of the workplace and how women are consistently shut out of that. for example, at the bank that I was at, like a lot of our networking was really centered around golf, like things like fantasy football, and developing those personal relationships are really focused like in areas that women are shut out of. Like, of course, we don't have a lot to say about a fantasy football league, and in golf, it's just like a very like male kind of oriented space. And so I think that like it's important to address systemic like areas of repression that happen in the workplace, but also addressing like what happens outside of the workplace. For example, it's a lot harder for a young woman to ask like one of her older male coworkers out to like get a coffee or to get a beer, where that conversation is a lot more natural between two men. In terms of addressing that, I think it's really important for women who have progressed further in their career to be really accessible to younger women within the firm, and to really develop a network amongst ourselves, because it's a lot more difficult for us to insert ourselves in some of the networking opportunities that are really like just oriented and designed for males to network. I know, and it's like, and really just bringing to light, like when we're talking about our golf tournaments that we're organizing at the bank I was at, it's like the only time that we've kind of talk about like how women would plan to be like, oh, are the MD's wives going to come? It wasn't really like, what about to the women that are MDs or leaders themselves? And so I think that is really a space that needs to be addressed, and also like an area where we can support each other, whether we're at the same company or at different companies, just really making sure that we're supporting each other as women, and being as responsive and helpful as we can. And to the younger women listening in on this panel, don't be afraid to reach out to the women who are older at your firm, at your company, or anywhere that you want to be, you know, in 5 years or 10 years, because they're going to be very receptive to that. In terms of addressing how financial literacy can help women and address different areas of inequality, I think that where that comes in is that, you know, there's obviously a huge difference in the amount of wealth that women control versus the amount of wealth that men control. And I think that part of that is obviously the wage gap, but then it's also how women think about growing their money. And so women, I think it's like women hold about 71% of their assets in cash, where men only hold about 61% of assets in cash. And so women tend to invest a lot less than men. But women actually should invest a lot more and should be a lot more confident in their abilities, because Fidelity ran a study and women actually tend to outperform men when they invest by, I think, about 40 basis points, which is a sizable amount, you know. I think that women tend to be really good at thinking holistically, being patient, and not being as snappy and competitive in the marketplace, which is definitely areas that are rewarded in terms of holding on to investments that make sense and not kind of going with crowd mentality. And so I think that that's where financial literacy can really help to address areas of wealth inequality.
Oh, those are all really, really great points. Tamina, I noticed you agreeing with some of it. Do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to share my personal experience. I think for me personally, the biggest apprehension is always the unknown of the culture that I'm immersing myself into. So anytime I join a new company or a new group or even a school, I always question myself, is it going to be the environment that supports women development, or is it the company that pretends that the challenge doesn't even exist? And you really don't know until you step in and experience for yourself. And I have to say that I was always very fortunate to work for companies that tremendously support women. But for those of you who are not that lucky, I would say don't get despondent. It actually can be a really great opportunity to raise your hand and volunteer and create some sort of support system for women. And as you do this, you're going to get to know new people and expand your network, and you know, develop some pretty powerful leadership skills.
Oh, that's a great point. Jenny, did you have something you wanted to add?
So I'm probably going to be a little bit off base here from everyone else, but I think it's important to support women, but I also think that it's important to support the young and upcoming men to understand that they have to support the women too. Like, the women cannot do it by themselves, number one. And number two, you have to think about everything in terms of relationships and find commonalities. I've got plenty to say about fantasy football. I think everyone's wasting their time on it, honestly. So that's my plenty to say, and I'm pretty upfront about it. That's not where I excel, and you have to appreciate people for where they excel and what they do, and view it less like in terms of gender separation, but more on then like holistically, what does that person bring to the table, right? And whether it's a man or a woman, especially this upcoming generation, especially for this audience, you all have to work together. There's not going to be that many of you. People are not having a lot of babies. So, you know, the next generation, while automation and AI seems to be the thing that everyone is worried about, the most precious skills will be human interaction, being able to read people's emotions. And that sort of contributes to the whole financial literacy. Like Fern was talking about what's holding women back about investing. Frankly, I'm a conservative investor. I really don't like the stock market. But what's holding it back is fear. And it's losing the dollars that you work so hard to attain. But that all those things like AI is going to help improve, et cetera, but you still need to find a consultant or a financial advisor whom you trust. And then at the same time, where Tamina was talking about, you know, the culture and the language, every workplace has its own culture. And that's why financial literacy can help you figure out the cultural literacy too, because it's about what people value. They're not always going to write that in their code of conduct about what they value. The code of conduct is really more a standard document, but it's also all the unspoken things that happen at a workplace that you really need to figure out. And that's why the literacy skills that you gain from financial, you've got to take that and apply it to everything else, just like the previous keynote speaker talked about.
No, those are all really great points. And I think that when you talk about financial literacy, I think it also links in many ways to entrepreneurship. And Adora, I know that you deal a lot with startups in your line of work. And I was wondering, do you think financial literacy helps play a role in enhancing the confidence of women to build their own businesses and create in many ways a more representative workforce? And have you seen this change in your line of work?
I definitely do think so. In fact, working with startups, I am able to contrast the response of both women founders and male founders when it comes to their level of confidence and financial literacy in terms of driving their business forward. I think one of the most telling differences for me was speaking to a female founder who had a really interesting idea and had I think a really compelling business proposition, but she was afraid to take it forward to investors because she didn't feel like she had her finances perfect yet. And I feel like I felt really discouraged by that, because I felt that there were a lot of other people who have started business, males who have started their business and have a great idea and they just run with it, and they might not have the finances worked out yet, but they're able to go ahead and talk about it and fudge the numbers as much as they need to. Do you know what I mean? So one of the things I was trying to encourage her to do, with my help, was to take the pieces of her business piece by piece, one piece at a time, and build up a narrative around the financial components of those pieces. Ultimately, I think what will give us confidence as investors and as founders and business leaders is to take charge of, yes, acknowledge that maybe there are some things that we don't know, but then look at all of the tools that we need to gather around us to build our knowledge and in fact build that confidence. Actually, the idea around how women can do that is actually something that's been studied before. The TD Wealth's 2018 behavioral finance report looked at women's behavioral finance, and they found that conscientiousness as a whole is the main contributor to success. They showed that if women can educate themselves about financial literacy, that in turn gives them the confidence to make decisions about their investments, about their wealth, about their financial health. So coming into that lack of confidence in comparison to men, women's confidence in their own financials was only 31%. And by the same token, women who were studied, the BDC BDC is Canada's development bank. They also did a similar study focusing strictly on founders in 2017, and they found that only 58% of women consider themselves either knowledgeable or very knowledgeable about their business's finances, compared to 71% of men. So here's where the lack of confidence holds women back in terms of being fully engaged as leaders in their business. And the way that financial literacy can fix that is by gathering the tools that they need to understand all of those pieces. What you need to do really is look for those resources either through, a course. Venture Deals is a very interesting course that helps people to learn about what it is, what the nomenclature and what all the pieces are that are going into the financing of their business. But you have to look at your networks. You have to look at the news, look at deals, what's happening out there currently. Is a business similar to yours getting financing? And who is your network? Who are your mentors? Who are other business owners who can help you to close those gaps? So I definitely think that as women will grow in confidence and become much better leaders through that knowledge. We're also seeing that in the corporate world as well, not just among founders. For example, Fortune found that they announced earlier this year that out of the Fortune 500, now there are 37 companies on that list in the US, which are led by women. So we are making strides, we are making progress. And I think speaking again to the point Fern made earlier, and to Jenny as well, we can't all do it alone. We have to engage people around us as supporters. We also have to advocate for ourselves. We have to ask for that help. And I think that's also described when you're looking at the makeup of those 37 women who are founders in the Fortune 500. We're still very low on diversity and inclusion in other metrics. There are very few people of color represented on that list. And so it's going to take a concerted effort through all aspects. The idea of gender balance and gender equality is not just a challenge for women, and it's not just a challenge for white women. It's a challenge for everyone. And financial inclusion, digital inclusion, the only way that we're all going to progress is if we come together to work on that together.
Can I just add one point to that? Because those are great points, Adora. And I think the other inclusion that needs to happen is the emotional equity. Because I think for all the discussion that we have about financial equity and pay equity and all that, I don't think the emotional equity is there. So we have not conditioned to train people to think that if you're, and a couple of years ago, I spoke on a panel about politicians and running for office, because I'm a political law lawyer. And the two men who had run for office, one had won, one didn't, their wives were literally their entire support system. They gave up parts of their lives for that. And so one of the questions that someone in the audience had is like, what should I think about if I'm going to run for office? I said, make sure you get a supportive spouse. And if you're a woman, make sure especially you get a supportive spouse, because if you don't have that, it's just not worth all the hassle. And it's just going to be a lot of, it ends up being a lot of financial heartbreak in addition to emotional heartbreak as well.
Right. I just wanted to add very, very quickly that confidence is a very sensitive topic for women. We women tend to suffer from imposter syndrome more often than men. And it means that we often question ourselves, who am I to start a business? Or do I even deserve this job? And things like that. And there is a common belief that certain techniques really can help you to alleviate this syndrome. For instance, having a strong support group, just like you mentioned, or being prepared preparation can really help you. And what does it mean to be prepared? It means that the more financially prepared, educated I am, the less likely I'm going to question my ability to handle finance and start a business. So there is definitely a direct correlation between financial literacy and the level of confidence that you build.
No, I would definitely echo that. And I feel like as women, we're often socialized into being more nice and more modest than confident. And I feel like that's something that the next generation kind of has to overturn is if women are taught that it's okay to assert yourself. I think that could definitely make such a large difference. And kind of going on that point, Tamina, I know you do work in industry best practices and corporate governance, and so I was wondering, could increased financial literacy and representation of women in government and corporate boards, etc., translate into policy changes, or have they already? And how do companies implement these regulations and industry best practices that have to do with promoting more women in business? And how can they do it sustainably?
Right, that's a great question. And let me start by saying that professional education is the key reason why women get into politics and business in the first place. So that's why it's so tremendously important for us women to be educated. And once we're in a position and we have authority, then we can advocate for better policies and legislation. And speaking about women representation in business, let's look at some numbers. And I'm going to be speaking for the US, but the dynamics are pretty much similar for many other countries in the world. So last year, 50% of the workforce in the United States was represented by women. And just like Adora already mentioned, only 30, actually my last check was that only 33 companies out of the Fortune 500 companies list had women CEOs. And when it comes to corporate boards, roughly 20 to 22% of company corporate board directors are currently women. So as you can see, it may sound like we have achieved a lot, but women are not equally represented at the leadership level. So we definitely have some work to do here. And addressing the second question, I have to say that we have seen some really positive change, both at the legislation and industry levels. For example, in 2018, California became the first state in the US to pass the law that requires at least one woman director in a public company board. That's a huge positive step for us. And on top of legislation, on top of regulation, we'll also have to remember that the United States, again, just like many other countries in the world, it's a free market economy. And we really want to see the market itself and different players in the market to step in and take part. And again, luckily, it has been happening. For instance, early this year, 2020, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, which is one of the leading investment banks in the world, he made an announcement and said that the bank will not take a company public unless there is at least one female director. And to be precise, he said, unless there is at least one diverse director with focus on women, but we'll take it. And in a very similar way, many institutional investors, such as pension funds, asset management companies, they made it very clear that if companies want their money, if companies want their investments, they have to show that they can do business in a sustainable way. So it sounds like being just profitable is no more enough. You have to show that you have a sustainable business model. And of course, gender equality is one of the components of that sustainability agenda. So this is our new normal, and those companies that want to operate in this new market reality, they just have to follow the rules and the expectation. So the positive change is happening, and we expect to see more of that.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add on to some of the really awesome points that Tamina mentioned, with a more of a focus on venture capital and where a lot of the decision making is happening in terms of funding startups. So I think, or as of 2018, 9 out of every 100 top VC partners worldwide were women. So that's leaving about 90% of the decision making power, in the hands of men. And if we look at how that capital was allocated, I think only 3% of capital invested across the US was invested into all female founding teams. About 11.5% invested into either mixed gender founding teams and all female founded teams. That leaves about 89% of all venture funding going to fully male founded teams. And so I think that we need to put more women, as Tamina mentioned, in these decision-making seats. So I really commend Andorra and all the women in BC for being a part of that decision-making process, because I think that's really where we can have some impact. And to echo what Tamina said, there's a lot of progress that's been made, but there's still a long way to go.
Sure.
Now, I definitely kind of echo that, because as Adora mentioned, there is a significant disparity in not only in the representation of women, but women of color who have been historically underrepresented on these boards. And this kind of brings me to my next question. Jenny, I know that you do some work in criminal justice reform. So how do you feel the increasing availability of resources through development of things like online courses helps create a more financially aware generation of women? And how in this process of potentially making women more financially aware, how do we prevent certain sections of society, like incarcerated women? How do we prevent them from being left behind?
So I think there's two pipelines to this with respect to criminal justice reform. One is the women who are coming out of prison, and there are a lot of different reentry programs for them. And one of the most successful reentry programs actually ensure that while they are in prison, they are thinking about their financial situation when they come out. So one is Arrowhead Foundation in Phoenix, Arizona. It's headed up by Allison Rapping, and she is very intent on making sure the women in her program actually get some financial literacy course work and also get advised, because they're making money in the prisons, working for certain specific companies and learning skills. So when they come out, they're ready to rent an apartment, et cetera. I think the other pipeline that, though, you do have to attack at the same time are the children of incarcerated parents and children who are of limited means, simply because if you do not broach those children and you do not get them educated and you do not get them literate in something, then they're just going to end up back in a cycle potentially too. And that doesn't serve anyone. And then we're back where we started. We have to figure out how to shut down one pipeline and then figure out how to help the people who are coming out of the pipelines that we neglected for so long.
Right. And I just wanted to add that when it comes to reaching out to women in, let's say, challenged communities, I think a public-private partnership can be a really powerful tool. This is when you bring the power and support of the public sector, that is governments and NGOs, and couple it with the private sector contribution. There could be financing, expertise, execution. So this is where you create a tool that can reach out to people that are usually not covered through the regular channels.
And I think just adding to that, there are so many ways of investing in these types of channels that can appeal to investors of different risk appetites. Normally what happens is when you're talking about investing in underrepresented founders or or diverse communities that are off the beaten track of where the investment dollars normally go, the response from the investors or the banks are it's just too high risk. But if you take a look at those types of public-private partnerships, and if you look at how blended finance, for example, can help to crowd in capital, crowd in investment, to give people a choice of risk profile across the risk spectrum, you can have something where the initial capital that goes into these founders or that goes into these communities is primarily through public funds or nonprofits who initially galvanize those small businesses with that initial risk capital that they need. And then by proving the concept, showing that they can gain customers or they can make an impact in that business, they can then crowd in capital at the higher end of the spectrum, where there's less risk, but there's also more capital. by increasing the capital from private investors and those financial investors. So there are a lot of opportunities where this kind of public-private partnerships and funding can merge to provide those types of support.
Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry, was someone saying something?
No, I just wanted to add that, and the time is so right to initiate those partnerships, because you probably heard about the rise of ESG, environment, social, and governance standards. So many companies, they're committed to the sustainability agenda, and they're looking forward to give back to their communities. So they're open to that kind of partnership, and it's all about initiating, bringing together those two parts and initiating those programs.
No, I think that's so informative, because you don't often think of it as being a profitable sector, but that definitely debunks a lot of myths that are out there about public-private partnerships. So Bob asked if there was a way to limit the liability of companies who want to hire women or men who have been incarcerated but are afraid of litigation resulting from hiring them. And Jenny, you said many states like Ohio have passed such laws. Would you want to expand on that maybe?
Sure. Many states have. I think the bigger problem is not the limiting of litigation. I think the bigger problem, just from talking to several businesses who are interested in hiring people with criminal records, is that insurance companies who provide a lot of the coverage for the businesses, there is no rhyme or reason to why some insurance companies are okay with covering businesses who hire people with criminal records and others who absolutely will not allow that in the policy. I know a couple of years ago when Uber started hiring drivers who had criminal records, they were going through some issues with the various insurance commissions, and they worked things out with the major auto insurance agencies. But that, I think, is a bigger problem. And Craig DeRoche of Prison Fellowship has actually been working on that problem a lot, because insurance, the whole insurance world is super complicated. There's all these layers of insurance, which I think probably Fern and Tamina probably can speak to much better than I can. I don't really understand all of it. I just have my house and auto insurance and personal liability, and I'm like, okay, great. But that is the biggest issue right now, is really how insurance companies set their policies and what their coverage and limits are.
Thank you so much. That definitely sheds a lot of light on the question. So just to kind of wrap things up, as we near the end of the panel, is what is one piece of advice that all of you have to all the young women watching this panel, and how do you think, and can financial literacy kind of propel us into a more equitable world? So why don't we go ahead with Fawn, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so I think that we spoke, I think all of us spoke a lot about like confidence on this panel and how we can empower women to be more confident in themselves. And I think we really spoke and kind of addressed this point, but to go even deeper, like it's very easy for us to say to women, like, you know, just be more confident in yourself. And I think that is sometimes in the same, it can be parallel to like when someone's sad saying like, oh, just don't be sad. Like it's incredibly challenging to be more confident when we consistently receive different feedback for the same actions. As a man, we're consistently not taken as seriously or not empowered in the same ways that men are. And so I think like really addressing how we can encourage women to be more confident in themselves is something we can kind of continue to discuss in the advice that we give to young women. So I think that like building a strong support system is the first and foremost important thing. I think we've addressed that, but then also thinking about like how like you can consistently develop your confidence. It's a skill as much as it is like an innate ability. So like one thing I think is really helpful is like I'm like the youngest on my team at Apple and one of the very few women. And so like one thing that I've done is that I lead all our team meetings just as a way to like have my voice be heard and get really comfortable talking in front of my whole team, which is mostly senior and male to me. And so just like taking those small steps and continuing to develop your confidence as you progress in your career is something that you should just be aware of and consistently make small steps to do. I think that success is like 50% competence, which we all know that women have. We should be incredibly, incredibly secure in our aptitude, but also it's 50% confidence and really taking the time to develop that and developing a support system to do that. And so I encourage any of the women listening in on this panel to please reach out to any of us on here. We're here because this is something we really care about. I think our contact information should be somewhere accessible on the website. So please reach out to other women in positions that you want to be in 5 years or 10 years, and really just take the time to work on your confidence. That would be my advice.
Adora, I noticed you agreeing. Would you want to add anything to that?
Definitely. I really think that the best way for us to advance as a gender is to invest in ourselves, but also to invest in each other. And that means that not only do we have to take charge of our own financial literacy, but we have to, participate in those networks and contribute to those networks that advance women to become leaders and to be able to invest in other women. There are so many resources to help women who are interested in investing as angels or investing in other companies. There are also good resources for startups who are female-led to gain access to capital, to networks, to mentorship. And just a few that I think are really important. I would say go to the Medium website and do a search for the Global Support Ecosystem for Women Entrepreneurs and Investors. That's an amazing list of investor programs that provide education to angels or investors who are looking to get into investing, but also to founders to be able to support their business. I think a couple that I would recommend for sure are Allraise. There's another one called Pipeline Angels. There's a Canadian one called SheEO. And also there's the SoGal Network, which is an international network that promotes investment in women-led startups as well as educates women who want to be investors. So the best way that we can move the needle is, as I said, to invest in ourselves, but invest in each other as well.
Damina, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Sure. I want to start by saying that I wish everyone to stay healthy, safe, and positive in this very difficult time. And my final piece of advice to all women is to please help each other. We women sometimes get criticized for not supporting each other enough. And the only way we can achieve gender equality is if everyone comes together and we act as one. So please support each other anyhow you can. And just like I will echo everyone else, I will say that if you have any questions, please reach out on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much. And I know, Jenny, you echo some of the advice about empowering other people too. So do you have any final comments that you would like to
Yeah,
add?
absolutely. Yeah, no, and thank you. I've learned so much from my fellow panelists and from just the speakers in general. But I would say always produce quality work and seek feedback, right? But also understand that that person who's providing you feedback, there's a certain lens. Really, really understand people and what their motivations may be. Sometimes you're going to misunderstand people's intentions, that's fine. But you really have to understand that, and your resilience is going to be the most important thing. Not everyone in the world will like you. You shouldn't expect to be liked a lot, because otherwise then that means that you're not doing anything if everybody likes you, because life at its core essence is not really fair.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to do this. This was such a great discussion, and I think that me and the audience have so much to gain from that. So thank you so much.